Food prices still rising. Food prices around the world recorded as much as 100% increase since COVID-19 began to spring in early 2020. You probably have been hearing a lot about the reasons behind this serious issue. Reasons such as high inflation, rising demand, supply chain issues, weak economic growth, climate change, natural disasters, conflicts, and all types of other interesting stuff that's applicable. However, no one seems to mention the most important reasons, that is, the government's bad decisions, lack of long-term planning, and poor management of the COVID crisis. So stick around if you want to know more about the immensely massive and complex food industry, its supply chain, and the main reasons and factors behind the current food prices crisis. Welcome to the World Econ News, your daily dose of economics and finance. If you're interested in topics influencing the world's economies and global financial flows, this is the place for you. Watch till the end if you want to get the latest on everything. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification button to get the latest updates. Let's go. The food industry is extremely important because humanity simply cannot exist without it. Food shortages or excess food prices can cause serious civil unrest and riots even in the most stable and rich countries. Historically speaking, food was used as a weapon during wars. Sadly, it's still used in such a manner until this very day. The first victims of food as a weapon are the children and the vulnerable, followed by the poor. In the past 25 years, the number of people who suffer from food insecurity, malnourishment, and even starvation has begun to decline. Nevertheless, this achievement was destroyed by COVID-19 because in the past 2 years, the number of people from around the world who suffer from food insecurity, malnourishment, or starvation nearly doubled. This fact might make you think that the shortage of food was and is the problem, but in reality, the opposite is true. There has not been a justifiable food shortage in any part of the world in the past 3 decades. The problem is the fact that more and more people cannot afford food, and there are even more people who cannot afford enough of it, while the number of people who cannot afford healthy, balanced diets is increasing globally, even in rich nations. The reality was created due to the rise of inequality, corruption, food weaponization, greed, and flaws in globalization. There are as many as 700 million family farms around the world, occupying between 70 to 80% of the world's farmland and producing more than 80% of the world's food. There are also no less than 200 million jobs globally within the food industry and related supply chain. These numbers are unfortunately not translated into wealth by small farmers in poor nations. Even now that many food prices nearly doubled, most farmers, big and small, are not getting richer. All recent studies failed to produce any evidence that the financial status of farmers in general and farmers in poor nations in particular have improved. On the contrary, a recent study of the famine storming some nations such as war-torn Yemen and Afghanistan found the markets are filled with food, but a high percentage of the population is unable to pay for it. They also found poverty among farmers is on the rise. The situation in most middle-income and some rich nations has also deteriorated. Small farmers of all sorts are not feeling the financial rewards of higher food prices, while the number of people using food banks quadrupled. The food industry is massive. Agriculture, livestock farming, the fisheries sector, and poultry farming represent the fundamental foundation of the food industry. Food processing and preservation, dairy production, food retail, restaurants, catering services, and the fertilizers industry are also part of the food industry. Some experts go as far as including the production of farming tools, equipment, and machinery, as well as foodstuff packaging and beverage productions as part of the food industry too. Even cargo ships manufacturers build small, medium, and large-sized fishing boats, and cargo ships that are specifically designed for the freight of fish, livestock, poultry, legumes, and cereals. The ground and rail transportation of the massive amounts of food industry products also require a special design. Heavy industries also generate big revenues from the food industry. Their role goes beyond the production of farming tools, equipment, machinery, ships, and transport vehicles because they're also responsible for the design, engineering, fabrication, and construction of food-related factories. Some foodstuff factories are massive, and their needs are constantly changing due to the nature of demand and competition. The food industry consumes 30% of the world's available energy. 70% of that energy is consumed beyond the farm gate. This also means that the food industry produces over 20% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. The global food industry and its supply chain are extremely complex and interconnected. It's estimated to be worth approximately $15 trillion, which is around 20% of the current total annual global economic output. The current ongoing crisis of globally skyrocketing food prices began with the spread of COVID-19 in early 2020. Before COVID-19, the food industry and its supply chain were stable and resilient. However, COVID forced every single central and regional government on the face of the planet to scramble to stop the pandemic. The focus since the beginning was on limited mobility, isolation, and lockdowns. These countermeasures resulted in the near collapse of the global supply-demand chain. The food industry suffered from the slowdown, glitches, and near-complete halt of farming, transport, shipping, packaging, and food processing operations. The restrictions also resulted in severe shortages of workers. Lockdowns, curfews, travel restrictions, and other measures, along with the fear factor, affected the ability of local and migrant workers to reach the work on farms, harvesting and process crops, and transport harvests. The same goes for food processing factories, which were also hit by the shortage of raw materials, parts, and equipment. Transport crews became unable to reach their cargo ships. Truck drivers became unable to operate freely. The border restrictions also crippled their ability to cross from one nation or region to another. The restrictions even hit ports. The movement of cargo ships became limited. Actions by all governments from around the world were chaotic at best. The situation was unique and unprecedented. They simply didn't know what to do. Now that you have a good picture of the size, scope, complexity, importance, politics, and imperfections in the food industry and its supply chain, allow me to tell you a story that will give you a clear idea about how COVID-19 related disruptions, corruption, and greed caused you to recalculate your monthly budget just to put food on the table. The story is about globalization, which is not new because people for thousands of years traveled long distances and across continents to trade. But today, the world has become a small village. A major fire at a factory in China can disrupt the operations of 50 factories in 50 countries. So here is the story about the globalization of bread. The different varieties of bread consist of a combination of some of the following ingredients: flour, salt, sugar, yeast, oil, maybe some milk and butter, clean fresh water, eggs, and baking powder. An oven is required to bake the bread. The oven needs electricity or a gas to produce heat. The bread is usually packaged in paper or plastic bags, and a lorry or truck is needed to distribute it to retailers and grocery stores. If you think all these ingredients and tools that are used in small, medium, and giga bakeries are produced in your country, well, you're wrong. The chances of that happening these days are slim to nothing. The truth is, most ingredients probably originated from different countries. Some of these countries are thousands of miles away from where you are now. And guess what? Some of the ingredients are also a result of the farming operation in a different country from the one that processed and packaged it. This means that tens to hundreds of thousands of people in as many as 30 countries participated in providing that loaf of bread in your kitchen. Thousands of investors and governments, farmers, businesses, transports, shipping companies, food processing factories, and you name it, cooperated and coordinated in order to make that loaf of bread in your kitchen possible and affordable. This is globalization. This is how the world works today. This is free trade. This is a global village. Even the electricity or gas used in the process of baking the loaf of bread is possibly imported from a different country. The oven was probably made in China, Indonesia, or Germany. In a nutshell, COVID-19 forced all governments on Earth to undertake measures that disrupted this supply chain very negatively, while corporations and the super-rich capitalized on the situation to become richer. There are thousands of articles out there about the current global food prices crisis. They all seem to talk about lots of fancy stuff. Some are even blaming natural disasters and climate change for the recent spike in food prices. However, all evidence points that despite the general well-known ongoing and documented effects of natural disasters, climate change, and conflicts on the global food industry and related supply chain, the current crisis is man-made. Would you like to learn more about what influences the world economies and global financial flows? Click on one of the videos that shows up on the left or go to our channel to find other interesting topics. And I'll see you next time.